All right, we kind of read through a lot of things, and so I'm going to go back to chapter 7 and read again, but we're not going to read a lot of verses and try to answer. I think did we answer question 3 on page 8? That's where we're starting? Okay. So in chapter 6, Job is saying, what he's saying in chapter 6, and that's out of gas. That his complaint is just. Job is very certain. That's one thing that we know about Job. He's very certain as to his life and the kind of life that he lived. He lived, and again, we've mentioned this several times, but at the beginning of the book, it tells us that he was just, he was upright, he feared God, he turned away from evil. The writer is telling us this. And then Job begins to talk about his suffering and asking why he does not know why. And he is saying that God has put a target on me and I don't know why. And so that's Job's attitude. But then in chapter 7, he's talking about his suffering, his misery. It is unbearable. And it is. Job, you have to remember that Satan was allowed to hit Job with everything he had and not to kill him. So you can imagine the type of pain that he was suffering and having to live through it. And so Job, in his complaint, was talking about how that, he wanted to talk to God. He didn't have any... there was no communication with God. He didn't know what was going on. And so, but he's saying that, I have lived a just life. My complaint is that I can't find God. I can't find answers. I want to know why. I want to know that why God is doing this to me. And then he is saying that he has no comfort in his suffering. I mean, what I'm saying is there is no rest. There is no rest in any part of the day. His suffering is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 30 days a month, whatever you want to say. So Job is his complaint is that he wants to know why this is happening to him. And I don't know how much pain that an individual can bear. We can probably bear more than we want to or realize that we can. Sometimes I think that we have, and this is my opinion, I'm not a medical profession, but we live longer than we're supposed to because of modern medicine. Now that's just something it's with me. And there's people who has been hospice nurses have better grasp of what people are going through than I do. So, but regardless of that, Job's suffering was tremendous. He says in verse 1, he says, "Is there not a time of hard service for a man on earth? Are his days also like days of a hired man?" And what he's saying is that here's a hired man that goes out into the field and he works, and he cannot sit down. His master or his owner or his employer will not let him sit down, will not let him rest. And what he's saying is that he's like the hired man. There is no rest in the day for him. His pain, his suffering is a burden. He says, verse 2, "Like a servant who earnestly desires the shade, and like a hired man who eagerly looks for his wages, So when he looks for the shade, he can find rest. When he has his wages at the end of the day or end of the week, when he's paid, then the work is done. But his suffering is like the work that continues to go on. And so verse 3 says, so I have been allotted months of fertility, and wearisome nights have been appointed to me. And so question number 3 on page 8, it says, how does Job describe his suffering? Months of suffering. It's not pain at the end of the day. It's constant pain, constant suffering, and there's months of it. So there we know that when Job's friends came, it wasn't the next day or the next week or the week after that. He's been going through this for months now. Not just 1 month or 1 week, but many months. And then he says, and when I lie down, I say, when shall I rise and the night be ended? For I have my fill of tossing till dawn. So he can, as we lie down at night, and if we sleep like we're supposed to, sleep well, we get rest. But there's no rest. He's tossing and turning the entire night. He has sleepless nights because of his suffering and because of his pain. So there again, he is describing his pain, his suffering as consistent. Anybody have anything they want to add to that? Now, verse 5, we mentioned this. My flesh is caked with worms and dust. My skin is cracked and breaks out afresh. So in the boils that he has, remember what the Bible says, that Satan struck him with boils from the top of his head to the bottom of his foot. And so the common thing was during grief or during suffering or pain, in the middle of the city or the middle of the town was a pile of ashes. This is generally the custom. So these ashes are there, and they would sit in the ashes in the center of the town, and people would see their grief. And the idea here is that the worms, notice what is this? The worms is caked with, my flesh is caked with worms and dust. So the boils have gotten so bad that the flies have laid their eggs in it, and now he's got maggots in the flesh. And he's sitting in this dust pile, in this pile of ashes, and covering himself with it. Well, that's a means of drying those things out to relieve the pain. And then he talked about the potsherd, that he would scrape the wounds with a potsherd to relieve it. So he is sitting in these ashes, caked with ashes. The maggots are working in his skin. I was in Guyana, South America one time, and went down to, it was in Monkey Mountain, but probably about 3 or 4 days in, I kept feeling my toe, between my toes, it just itched. And so I thought I would just scratch it, So after about 3 days, after I got home, I was sitting in the chair, didn't have any socks on. Sue says, "What's between your toes?" She said, "Don't you wash your feet?" I said, "Yeah, I wash my feet." Well, I opened my toes up, and there was a sore there. And when I mashed it, a worm came out. It was a sandfly. And they get in your socks, and they get between your toes, and they call it a sweet itch. It doesn't hurt, it just itches. And so you scratch it, and it kind of feels good. So I went to Dr. Allen, and I said, This is what happened. And I had another one, and I mashed it, and this worm came out. And he looked at it, and he said, "Yeah, that's bad. What you gonna do about it? I ain't gonna do nothing about it." But anyway, he and I got a good relationship.
Joel,
Yeah.
if you think about this, what all happened to Joel physically,
Mm-hmm.
we have to consider the fact that not only is this bodily pain that he was going through, but he lost his children.
Yeah.
That to me, I just said here how bad, the pain of losing your children,
Right.
and then undergoing this.
Well, bad health is one thing. Losing your children will be devastating. And now he's lost 10. Not one, but 10. All at once at the same time. Now, there is a level, and I say this, but there is a level by which we all have it's about self-worth is what it's about. And so the basic needs that we have is, number one, food. Number two, clothing. Number three, shelter. HELTER. And number four is love. So the first basic need that we have is this right here. When you're hungry, it doesn't matter about anything. Nothing matters. Nothing else matters. So, we have a lot of guys that come here and they say, "Well, I'm hungry. I haven't eaten." Or you may get to Pensacola and you see those guys out on the street corners and they're begging for food. That is the first basic need. When this need is satisfied, the next need that we have is clothing. That means if we are naked, we're going to seek clothing. That's the second thing. If we're hungry, we don't care about this. If we have food and we don't have clothing, we're going to find clothing. We're going to seek clothing. And then the third thing is, if you have food and clothing but don't have shelter, you'll find shelter. You'll seek shelter. And then the fourth is love. Now, this comes in all kinds of love. It comes in friendship love. It comes in parental love. It comes in husband and wife. We have the need to be loved. But this trumps everything. And then this comes into play. And then this comes into play. And then, of course, this comes into play. So you can't talk to anybody about the gospel of Christ if people are hungry. They won't listen. They will not listen. You preach to them all day long, and it will go in one ear and out the other, or it won't even penetrate. So, when you have food and clothing and you're out walking around and it begins to rain, what are you doing? You're looking for shelter. Now, let me say this. When you go over to Pensacola or Mobile and you see people who are homeless, what you find is people who study human behavior tell us there's some type of mental disorder. Now, I don't mean that in a bad way, but it is not natural for people to walk out in the rain not having shelter, if you follow what I'm saying. So what Kenneth is saying is not only did he have the physical pain that he had to deal with, now he has lost his children. He's lost all of his children. He might as well not have had shelter nor clothing. He didn't care anything about food. But, these things were affecting him mentally. And all of these things do. All of these things affect us mentally. And we measure self-worth with these things here. And if you want to study this, it's called Maslow's hierarchy hierarchy of needs. This is first, this is second, this is third, this is fourth, and the list continues on. But these are the basic four that people have. So the hierarchy of needs by Maslow, and it's pretty interesting to see. Any comment? Any question? So in verse 3, or question 3, so he's had months of suffering. He has his flesh were caked with worms. His skin was cracking open. He had wearisome nights, and he had even his skin was decaying. So so now he is in a place of misery. Now we live in a place of comfort. We can find food, clothing, shelter fairly easily. If you don't have shelter, somebody that does, and whether it's family members or not. So, but here's Job in a time in the world where people didn't have what we have today. So, anyway, anything else? Any comment? Any question? So, something else that we could think about is adding to this is, what about Christ and his suffering? Now, he didn't have the problem of worms in his skin. He didn't have the problem of shelter or clothing, but he had a greater problem. And that was what? What did he bear? Bear the sins of the world. And the thing about Christ, he already knew about the pain before it was coming. Would you agree with that? Matthew 26, Father, let this cup pass from me. Not my will, but thy will be done. And even at the age of 12 years old, what was he doing in the temple? What was he talking about? He was questioning the doctors and the lawyers and the people there, and questioning about the Messiah and the Old Testament. And it would be kind of speculation, but when he said, I must be about my Father's business, he wasn't just talking about animal sacrifices. He's talking about the Christ to come. And he knew, to me, he knew the pain before it would come. He knew what it would be like. And of course, when you're on the cross, it is such a horrendous picture of suffering. And here's Christ, and he is crying out, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And it's, we can't express it the way he's expressed it on the cross. I mean, he was screaming this. And then, of course, he suffered all of these things. Hebrew writer tells us that, his tears, with vehement tears, with crying and weeping. And he says, and the sweat, the capillaries in his face, brought forth blood and water. It was a medical condition that in so much agony and stress that the veins in his, or the, what do you call those things in your face? It's not veins, is it? The capillaries bursted and just like bleeding in his face because of the stress and the pain. And can you imagine having the spikes driven through your hands and feet? and hanging on that cross. Yeah, Kenneth.
You may have read this article. This article was written by a doctor, and he wrote it up in the medical papers and magazines and all that, and it describes in detail what actually happened to the physical body of Christ. And
when he was on the cross.
Yeah, it was kind of eye-opening to what all this stuff.
And you think about him hanging on that cross. First of all, there's been several writers about it. Of course, some of them say that Jesus died on the X. The Bible doesn't say he died on an X. He died on the cross. The cross members, of course, you have the common thing was the post that the Romans would put, and then they would put the cross bar. So when Jesus carried his cross, most scholars say he carried the crossbar, and that was set on the top there for that. Now, again, that's speculation. That's a T. That's not really a cross, but and then, of course, if you think about him, his hands and his being nailed to the cross, and he probably, I don't know how much he weighed, 130 pounds maybe? But that's enough, isn't it? Can you hang that way? Some of them says that his hands were not nailed to the cross this way, but they were placed over behind the bar and nailed from behind. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but that would hold, he would be able to hold himself up, but not continue to do that. Of course, his feet being nailed together and pushing up, it would be tremendous pain. Of course, when you couldn't hold yourself up, and if you're like this and you drop, guess what? You're going to suffocate. So you'd have to push yourself up to breathe. And so how long did Jesus last on the cross? 6 hours. But the Romans, they had people that lasted for days. They were able to last for days. Jesus didn't have to be nailed to a cross for days to bear our sins. But, and all of this would be speculation unless we had firsthand witness of how that Jesus was crucified. But, he did bear our sins on the cross. And it was not as many describe it, without. It was very emotional. I bought the movie The Passion of Christ, and I've always planned to watch it, but I hadn't watched it for some reason. Anybody watch it? It's in the Hebrew. Is it written in the Hebrew or written in the Aramaic? And then you have to read the caption. Eye-opening.
Yeah, we went to the theater and saw it. Theater was full, and nobody, you can hear a pin drop.
Yeah.
People crying afterwards,
I don't think we understand the impact of it. I just don't think that, unless we're the eyewitnesses of that. Can you imagine Mary standing there at the cross looking up? There's her son. And then the prophecy comes true in Luke chapter 2, where it says that an arrow will pierce your soul, pierce you. And you can imagine what she was going through when Jesus was there. Job has suffered probably more than any person in the world. I don't know the human history. I would be hard pressed I think you'd be hard pressed to find somebody that suffered more than Job did. But Christ bore the sin of the world, not just the agony and the pain, and not just that, but, here is the separation from Christ and God, from the Father. He cries, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Two reasons for that. Number one, the weight of the sin and the darkness over the entire earth is a picture of how dark things were. And number two, it was a fulfillment of prophecy that when those Jews heard him say that, it would trigger what they knew in Psalm chapter 22. And it was a fulfillment of prophecy to let them know that here's the Messiah. The Messiah is going to say, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And then, of course, Jesus does that on the cross. So, all of these things are eye-openers. Anyway, anybody got any comment, any question? So Job has described his sin, not his sin, his suffering. And then he says, verse 4, well, we read that, when I lie down, I say, when shall I rise and the night be ended? In other words, I'm going to set my alarm clock for 5 o'clock in the morning or 6 o'clock in the morning and go to sleep and rest. There is no rest. He says, my flesh is caked with worms. Read that. My days are swifter than a weaver's shuttle and are spent without hope. Oh, remember that my life is a breath. In other words, Job believed that he was going to die very soon. His life has already flashed by him. When you're in that kind of condition, and Job has not seen anybody in the condition that he's in. And so he's looking at the end is very near. And yet he's not going to die right then. I've seen people begging to die in the hospital. I'm sure some of you nurses have also seen that. It can be very difficult going through that. So he says, my eyes will never again see good. This is like Brother Kenneth said, not only his physical condition, but his mental state. This affects our mental state right here. All of this affects our mental state. If we don't have what we need, then our mental state, everything is dark and everything seems to be worse. It seems that the pain is greater on the dark and rainy days. All right? He says, oh, remember my breath. Remember my life as a breath. My eyes will never see good again. The eye of him who sees me will see me no more. While your eyes are upon me, I shall no longer be. As the clouds disappear and vanish away, so he who goes down to the grave does not come up. So what is he saying? My days are swift. I will see good no more. The people that see me and love me are not going to see me more. And God is not going to see me anymore because I'm not going to be here. I'm not going to be on earth. That was his mental state. That was the problem he was going through. Now, of course, he talks about the resurrection. He talks about being justified and all this kind of stuff. But he's talking about how that he felt like he was a target and that God had his eyes fixed on him. But when he's dead, then he's not going to be in God's sight. He's not going to be that target anymore. Comment, question?
Verse, right, the next verse was, therefore I will not keep silent. He was fighting with everything he had.
Yes.
To say why, and then he's not giving up.
Right. Yeah, he says, I'm not going to be silent with this. I'm not going to withhold my complaint. He says, that's verse 11. He says, I will speak in the anguish of my spirit. I will complain in the bitterness of my soul. M-I-A-C. Now, we talked about this last week, but the C represents power. And what he's saying, am I a sea, or am I a sea serpent that God would fix his eyes on me to destroy me? In other words, Job was questioning. Job is saying, what am I? I am worthless. But does God think I'm the sea with great power, that he fixes his eyes on me and seeks to destroy me? Am I a sea monster that God fixes his anger on me and takes out his anger on me? That's what Job is saying. Job says, I'm nothing, but God is he is fixed to take me out. He says, let's see, what verse was that? Verse 13. When I say my bed will comfort me, my couch will ease my complaint, then you scare me with dreams and terrify me with visions. And I said that, a person that has health problems is going to see things. But in thinking about this, when a person is going through this much pain and through this much suffering, he is in terror. He closes his eyes, and all that he sees is someone torturing him and coming at him. He is terrified in his life. So that my soul chooses strangling and death rather than my body. I loathe my life. I would not live forever. Let me alone, for my days are but a breath. Now he's talking to God. And he's saying, what is death that, notice what it says, that my soul chooses strangling. What he's saying is death has a hold on him like he's around his neck. And death is strangling him. That's what he's saying. I'm not holding back my complaint anymore. I'm telling you how that the terror, I close my eyes and I'm in terror. Death has his hands around my throat and is strangling me. So this is what Job is facing. Now he's in a dark place. He's in a very dark place in the world. He says, what is man that you should exalt him? In other words, here's Job. He's had all of these cattle, all the sheep. He's had all these possessions. He's risen to be a man of great influence. He says, what is man that you ought to raise him up and give him all of these things, that you should set your heart on him? In other words, now you raised him up. What you going to do to him? You're punishing him. Why are you punishing me? And he says that you should visit him every morning and test him every moment. How long will you not look away from me and let me alone till I swallow my saliva? He says he is in so much terror. God has targeted him to where he can't even swallow his own spit. His death has him by the throat. God is fixed on him. Now, when you get to chapter 38, God's anger is kindled. And so this is some of the reason that is done, that is like that. He says, have I sinned? Now, anybody got the King James? What does it say? Read it, if you don't mind.
I have sinned.
Okay. I have sinned. That is a statement. Some of the comments in New King James and probably in some of the others it says, have I sinned? But the King James probably has translated it better. That he is saying that I have sin in my life. But does my sin deserve what I'm going through? Am I such a terrible person that you have set a target against me, that you shoot the arrows in me and my soul, my spirit drinks up that poison? Now this is poetic. This is poetry. But he says, what have I done to you, O watcher of men? Why have you set me as a target so that I am burdened to myself? Why then do you not pardon my transgression? So Job, what did Job do? He feared God, turned away from evil. What did he do for his children on their birthday? He offered sacrifice. Job lived as close to God as anybody ever did. And he says, why don't you pardon my sin? I have sinned. Why don't you pardon that? I'm not a murderer. I'm not an adulterer. I'm not a thief. I'm not an extortionist. I don't enslave people. The sin that I have is not of great value, but why don't you pardon me? And that's the question he's asking. And he says, why then do you not pardon my transgression and take away my iniquity? For now I will lie down in the dust, and you will seek me diligently, but I will no longer be. That's how dark he was. He says, I'm going to lie down in the dust. What does that mean? He's just going to die. I'm going to lay down and die, and then you won't be after me. You will not be targeting me. So, anyway. So now that's Job's speech. And he has talked in chapter 7 about his suffering and about his pain. And so now Bildad's coming up. And Bildad, Eliphaz has already talked to Job. Eliphaz is saying that God punishes the wicked and that God does not punish the righteous. Job, you are suffering. You are hurting. Therefore, you are being punished by God. That makes you a sinner. That was Eliphaz's speech. What's Bildad's speech? Same thing. Same thing. You know, they start out, and you know what, when they came and Job began to speak, it was almost Job could see their disdain. They came to comfort him, but he could almost see their disdain and how that they believed because of his suffering that he was guilty as a sinner. So what's Bildad going to do? Just accept what God's doing to you, repent, and then of course God's going to bless you. Notice what he says. How long, verse 2, will you speak these things, and the words of your mouth be like a strong wind? Boy, that's some nice words from a friend. How long are you going to talk like this, Job? When you're talking, you're just blowing like the wind. You have no value in your words. Does God subvert judgment, or does the Almighty pervert justice? You mean, does God make a mistake in his justice? How do you accuse God of punishing you and you being sinless? How can you do that, Job? And so he continues to say, if your sons have sinned against him, he has cast them away for their transgression. Whoa, that's a slap, wasn't it? If your sons have sinned, God's going to take them out. Well, what happened to Job's sons? They were taken out by a tornado. And he says, if you would earnestly seek God and make your supplication to the Almighty, if you were pure and upright, surely now he would awake for you and prosper your rightful dwelling place, and through your beginning, though your beginning was small, yet your latter end would increase abundantly. Well, Job, you know, if you were pure and upright, then God would restore you. You're not being restored. You start out small. God's going to bless you. Well, he was the greatest man of all the East. And yet what they're saying, he's saying here is, Job, you need to submit yourself to God. God does not pervert justice. God doesn't make mistakes. And of course, you're going through all this because you're a sinner. And then he says, for iniquity, please of the former age, and consider the things discovered by their fathers. For we were born yesterday and know nothing, because our days on the earth are a shadow. Will they not teach you and tell you and utter words from your heart? What's he saying? He said, Job, you need to learn from your fathers. You need to learn from the people that lived before you. They know that if you submit yourself to God, then he will awaken. He will take you and lift you up. And Job, you're not learning anything. You go through life very quickly. You're going through life quickly, and haven't you learned anything? You're not going to learn anything on your own, but you can learn from your forefathers, but you're not doing it. So that's what he's saying to him. Nice friend. All right, so as far as a question, I guess we begin, what's today? 26th? So the 34th.